All right. It says that Hangouts is live. I will start it off for anybody who's tuned in at 5:01. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I'm going to pause for a second here.
Sure.
All right. Okay. Welcome to Cardboard in the Classroom. We're a podcast about using board games in the classroom to bridge a student's understanding and engagement with the purpose to richen their learning experience. And I'm just going to, I had to click a window there. All right. So this episode of Cardboard in the Classroom is brought to you by the great people at gamesurplus.com, where they have great prices and an excellent selection. And I would also like to take this opportunity to announce that we now have a Canadian sponsor. I think I have to say it in this way. We have a Canadian sponsor, eh? So that Canadian sponsor is Amazing Stories, and the connection we have with them is that's our friendly local game store. So we were approached, we had a good talk, and there we go. We now have a Canadian sponsor, and as mentioned, we have an American sponsor, GameSurplus.com. Hey there, this is episode 2 of Cardboard in the Classroom. I'm your host, Norm, and on today's episode, we're going to discuss the relationship between instructional design and board game design. And we have a special guest. Please stay tuned. And then we have our little cardboard cohort ad. Welcome back. Cardboard in the Classroom, episode 2. The relationship between instructional design and board game design. And I am so fired up to have on this podcast a teacher and board game designer, Sen. Say hi, Sen.
Hey there, Norm. How are you?
Good, good. Well, let's get this going, and we've taken care of that first part is to introduce yourself, but give us a bit of a bigger picture of who you are, by where you teach, what grade levels you teach, courses, so that we have a context.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sen. I'm a college professor. I teach psychology and other subjects at Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, which is in southwestern Ontario, which is part of Canada. And I teach in a program for developmental service workers primarily. So I primarily teach students who become educational assistants in the classroom, who become care providers and support personnel in the community at places like Participation House, community care, living, those type of situations where adults with developmental disabilities are living as independently as possible in the community, all sorts of stuff like that. So that's where I teach.
I want to, this was unexpected. I want to tip my hat to you and to all the people that you train, because I have a 13-year-old son who has Down syndrome. And if it was not for the amazing efforts by those individuals that support his development and his learning, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. So, kudos. I'm so impressed.
Well,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much for what you do.
Yeah, thank you for what you do, sir.
All right, so we've got the background as an educator. Let's I used the expression before. Let's have this Venn diagram and see where it folds on itself. Give us if you could give us a game history, game design history, when you, like, your first ones or your first step into it, and then
Sure.
good progressions, like hit the milestones if you want.
Let's see if I can get them all. I don't know if I can get them all, but we first started designing way back when my son was just under 2, and I know that because we had flown out to Vancouver to see Jay, my best friend and game design partner, who moved out to Vancouver to pursue his career, basically. And because Ethan was an extra piece of um, human that we needed to take with us, we flew as late as we could, so that he was old as he could be when he would meet Uncle Jay, but that he was also as young as he could be to still get free, so a free flight. So he was just under 2. and that was 14 years ago. No, 12 years ago, I guess, really, because he's 14 now. So it was about 12, 13 years ago almost when we really first started to seriously think about game design. I mean, before that, we played tons of games and we had tried to make a game, but it stunk. So we put it away on the shelf as first games normally do stink.
Mhm.
That's just a note for all you aspiring game designers out there. Your first game probably won't be one that you end up selling, but it will be one that is pivotal in your career as it defines the rest of it. And it's funny that we're defined by failure, but that's okay. I think that's a good thing to be defined by.
Future
Um,
successes.
yeah, exactly. That's all failures are. Failures become future successes, right? You have to have a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the first game that we designed, well, okay, that's a lie. But the first game that was published was actually the second game that we signed. And the first game we signed was Belfort. So Belfort is really our flagship game in terms of it was the first out of the gate. It is still one of our highest rated games, I believe, if not still the highest rated game on places like BGG and whatnot. In fact, that we're getting a reprint in a couple of days. We'll be live with Kickstarter in early October to reprint Belfort through Tasty Minstrel Games. It'll be the 10th anniversary edition of that. Not our 10th anniversary, but Tasty Minstrel Games 10th anniversary because it's probably 7 or 8 years for Belfort. And Belfort has gone through many, many, many print runs, but it's currently out of print. So now's as good a time as any to reprint that. So that was really our first big splash into board gaming. But it was actually preceded by, but wait, not but wait, there's more, but by Train of Thought, which Tasty Minstrel Games also did. They were looking for smaller games, lighter games, and considering even party games. And so Train of Thought is a party game, and because it was so fast to produce, it's just cards and a die and some timers, or a timer, and that game came out earlier than Belfort, even though it was signed later.
Mhm.
From then, we made a whole bunch of games, and I'm not going to get this correctly in chronological order, but we did games like Tortuga. We did, but wait, there's more, which I already mentioned.
Mhm.
We did This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Two to Four of Us, which is a really small 24 card micro game thingy that Tasty Minstrel did. We did. Oh, if you like theater, due to your theater background, you should definitely try. But wait, there's more. And
Okay.
you can get your internal Ron Popeil on and get your salesman going. It's a really good game for that. And if you do teach drama, actually, I don't know what you teach, but if you do teach some drama, it's a really good tool for that. Um, what else did we do? We did Junk Art. Oh yeah, Junk Art, that thing. Junk Art, the game that is probably our bestseller unit wise, maybe. I don't
And
know,
probably
probably.
heaviest if it's the wood edition?
Yeah, the wood edition's super heavy, but super nice. Then we started getting a lot of work in intellectual properties, and so we've done work with Dungeons and Dragons, Rock Paper Wizards, which was
Yep.
a real hoot to actually be a part of the Dungeons and Dragons world. That's great. We did a card game for Orphan Black, which was nice because that's shot, just down the street from me in Scarborough. And then we did a game for The Godfather, the movie. It came out before Eric Lang's Godfather. Another Canadian doing Godfather. Very, very interesting. And then we did some other work for other companies. So I do development work for WizKids and for everything Epic. So I've done games like Big Trouble in Little China. I wasn't the designer, but I was the developer on that. Metal Dawn, Who Should We Eat? So lots of different games have my
Cool.
fingerprints on them, even though my name's not on the box necessarily. And then I work with another friend of mine, Jesse Wright, and we did The Legend of Korra Pro Bending Arena game, and we have a whole whack of other games coming out under different properties. And Jay and I just got back into designing stuff together, and we've got this amazing escape room in a box game coming out. I don't know when, but we're just finishing it right now, so it
Fantastic.
should come out soon. because Jay had kids, and when he had kids late in life, and so and he had twins, so
Oh,
he was blessed slash cursed all at the same time with having kids late in life and all at once, and so he's sort of been out of the loop for a little while. So we're just really getting back into designing a new thing as opposed to curating and pruning the garden that is all our old games. And
that's
there's
good.
a bunch of other games that I just can't remember them, but they're there.
Well,
Oh yeah, like I just sent you a bunch of them actually. I sent
that's
them
right. Thank you very
to
much, by the way.
Rock, not Rock Paper Scissors, sorry. Tic Tac Moo. Tic Tac Moo is a game that I sent you guys. A two-player game. Oh, two-player games. I should say Akratiri.
I
That's
was
one of
waiting for that one.
yeah.
That's my favorite.
I know that's our favorite game too. That's one of the That's why I said, don't hate your first game because Akrotiri is based on our first game. It's not the exact mechanics that we used in the first game that we ever made. That was a piece of poop, but it is the spiritual successor, let's say. And I also sent you Djinn, which is a trick-taking card game that we made, and it's actually super, super cool. It's a trick-taking game where your tricks matter after, and not
Oh,
just when you take
nice.
them, but the trick that you take matters later in the game because you're trying to collect stuff out of those tricks to make sets that allow you to win the game.
Oh, okay. I just went on a tangent, so I'm just like, oh, I could just see how this could be deep.
Yeah, it's not necessarily super deep, but it's actually really interesting.
Well, at least I mean, I like it when there's interesting decisions. Doesn't necessarily
Hmm.
have to be deep, but just an interesting decision to make.
Yeah. And then we've made some games with Mercury Games, a Canadian company. So Zombie Slam, which is this sort of quick reaction game that has this app that runs and tells you where the zombies are and where they're coming from. So that's pretty fun as well. So yeah,
Oh,
I think there's more, and there's definitely more to come. There's already a ton of games. I'm just looking at my desk saying, "Oh yeah, can't talk about that one, can't talk about
yeah,
that one." But one that I can talk about,
for sure.
actually, I can talk about two of them. Another Kickstarter coming up at the end of October will be for Mutants, which is a card game. So it's a deck building card game, and it's really quite interesting. It has this mechanic where when you each card has a deploy ability and well, most cards have a deploy ability and a leave ability. So
Hmm.
as you're pushing your cards through this sort of tiered system, you get to play it for its deployability, and when it leaves the arena, it's an arena combat thing. When it leaves the arena, it also does a combination power. So there's all
Oh,
these neat kind of linkages as playing something, watching it pop out, it comes out, it does its thing, and you got to plan for that strategically, but then tactically respond to things that your opponents do in the arena. So that's a fun one that's coming out October 30th. Amazing art through Lucky Duck Games. So it was an app, and we did a game that is I wouldn't it's not a simulation of the app at all. That's not what Lucky Duck wants. It's a game that
interpretation.
yeah, interpretation captures some of the experience in a different way. And then a game that's coming out to Kickstarter probably first quarter of 2019 will be Mind Management, which is a game by Jay and myself that is super interesting. It is a hidden movement game, um, and it's really cool. So you have to see it to believe it. It's That's how neat it is. It's based on a comic book by my friend and Jay's friend, best-selling New York Times author Matt Kint. It's his comic series called from Dark Horse called Mind Management,
I'm gonna have
and
to do some
yeah,
research because this
yeah.
hidden movement, you just basically opened up my wallet.
There you go. And it's being published by our good friend Daryl Andrews, who is just down the street in Kitchener Waterloo. So another great Canadian designer, and he is starting a publishing house called Maple Games. So very, very Canadian. And our game will be like I think the third or fourth game that they're doing. So
Oh,
that'll be super cool.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, let's transition right into our topic, which is the relationship between instructional design and game design. And
yeah,
the first, well, the topic, huh? What strikes you about the topic? Because I mean, we're teachers. Once we see a statement or a theme, our brains kick into all the possibilities. So, what did
yeah.
you see? What did you hear?
Well, I really liked the idea of having a model. As a psychology professor, theories and models and things like that are very practical to me, and we use them all the time to look through the lens of model A or theory B when we're looking at human behavior and developmental. So it's really interesting to see that applied to not just instructional design, but how would we take this process and say, use it to make a game? Can we use this process to make a game? Because there isn't as defined a process. It's more like this witch's brew, and we stir the cauldron and something comes out. So I'd like to see, can we proceduralize game design? And I know we can. And I know there's parts that are,
Yep.
um, but does this lens of the instructional design process, the ADDIE model of an analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate, does that coincide or correlate to how we take things to the tabletop in any way, shape, or form? And the answer is yes, it does. And we should probably go through the 5 steps and see how.
Well, I was just you kind of hit the design process that I pulled up for both of us. And yeah, the ADDIE instructional design process. And you said like analyze, and they in the sub categories of that is identify and understand your learners, try to create broad goals in that analysis process, and then design. What are the specific skills you want your students to have? What knowledge do you want them to have? And as I'm going through this, I'm trying to see it through you as a game designer and just remove the word students and have, you know, players or board gamers, right?
Yep.
And the second part of the design is the outcomes. Like, how will you know that the students learned and to what degree they learned? The develop side is how are you going to facilitate the learning involved?
Right.
Then there's logistics as part of the development process. I mean, I teach high school, so classroom size impacts your development choices. The resources that you have impact your development process. And then the last two are implement, which is obviously try it out in class, see if it,
Mm,
see if it has legs. And then the last part, as in every design process, even the furniture designers, you evaluate how successful were you at this design. And much like we hear about game designers and playtesting, is what fixes need to be made before that design goes back to the beginning of this whole process again. So analyze,
mhm.
design, develop, implement, evaluate.
Yep.
So from a game designer, what like you said, there's looking through the lens of this process. Is this a suitable structure to start off with?
Oh yeah, I really do think so. Like if you take out lesson plan and turn that into game, and if you turn learners into players or participants, you're going to have roughly the same 5 steps. We just don't necessarily call it those same five
Hmm.
steps. um, but I think any good design process has to be a couple things. So um, this is how I define game design. I define game design as an emergent and iterative process, right? So, emergent in the fact that it's not just what I want. And I learned this very early on as a teacher, um, that it's not just what I want to teach, it's what the students are willing and able to learn.
Hmm.
Uh, because I teach at the college level, so I have all these highfalutin ideas about what students can learn, what they can learn, what they need to learn, and what they will learn. That's a Venn diagram in and of itself, right? Um, and we have college mandated learning outcomes. So we have objectives and learning outcomes handed down to us from a greater body, from the Ministry of College and Learning and whatever, right? So in Ontario, we have to meet those needs first and foremost. And how we do it, that is the big $1 million question, and why we get paid the big bucks. We don't, but you know what I mean. That without that design, that intelligent design of curricula, um, you're not going to get as good of an educational process as you will if you have some thought put behind it.
Hmm.
And so early on, I learned that I would rather have my students learn anything and something versus nothing.
Yeah.
And good design, good instructional design is the difference between learning something and learning nothing. Because just like with a good game, and you've seen it before when people disengage from your game and they lean back and they have their phone out. I mean, I can definitely tell when students do that as well. And I'm not saying that all students all the time are engaged in my lessons because that would be a lie. My class sizes are huge too. I teach class sizes of like 150. So, um, I don't teach them all at once. I have sections, but they're
Yeah.
sections of like 50 students each, which is around 1.5 to double the size of most most primary school and even some secondary school classes.
That's
So
pretty accurate. Yeah.
yeah, so you're looking at a bigger class with students who um, ostensibly want to be there, and that's kind of the difference that we get because college isn't mandated. You don't have to be in college. These are people who thought they wanted to do a profession, came to college to learn about that profession. And so we have a lot of really engaged people, but we have some people who aren't so engaged. And my goal, unfortunately, as with most teachers, we have this unfortunate place where, we're always caught teaching to the middle. We're always caught, I'm gonna catch the 90, the 96 odd percent, and there's gonna be 2% at each end of the 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 bell curve, unfortunately, because that's it's not a truism, but it's a truism.
Human nature.
Yeah, that there is unfortunately gonna be those, people who sit 2 standard deviations away from the norm. Some of them are going to lose it. They're going to lose the plot, but they're losing it for two very different reasons. One of them is losing it because they don't get it; they're not challenged by it. Uh, um, and those are the two reasons. One of them is not challenged,
Yeah.
and so their skill level is too high, and the other person is losing it because their skill level is too low, and they're being over challenged, and so they get anxious and they disengage or they can't keep up. And I mean, this goes right back to my area of study. Michaela Csikszentmihalyi and flow is a big part of how I design games, but it's also very, very relevant in classroom um, modification, classroom behavior and management, as well as instructional design, where you're trying to keep everybody within that flow channel, where the challenge is equal to the skill of the people, so that as they get more skilled, they get some more challenge, and that you can pull some things back. Um, and I guess one of the things that is harder in both instructional design and in tabletop game design would be the lofty, lofty goal of differentiated instruction. So, for those of you who aren't teachers out there, and you might be listening to this for the game side of things, differentiated instruction is basically teaching to the individual's level, skills, likes, strengths, etc., etc. That's kind of the layman's explanation for that. There's a little more to it, but that kind of covers it.
Yep,
Uh,
you hit it.
yeah, and so we can't be all things to all people. That is somewhat of the issue, both in games and in instructional design. And are we good enough being something to 96.8% of the classroom or the players? And good instructional design can get us there. Good instructional design can get us to where we are meeting even more of the people. And good design of games can get us to where we're accessible to even more of the people as well. But if we start this process off with analyze. So in the instructional design process, the ADDIE process, analyze states, take a look at your learners and gather as much information on them as you can. So even though you think you can't do that with the game design process, you really can. And really, what you're looking for here is what types of players would like to play this game. And when we design a game, we design with a player psychograph in mind. So if you don't know what psychographics are, Google psychographics and Magic the Gathering, and you'll see that there are three main ones and a bunch of sub ones. I think there's like six in total now, of player types that play Magic the Gathering. And you'll find that those types kind of do extend across all games. Just like you can take a bunch of learners who you've never met before, and you can say, okay, there's some here because they want to be here. There's some here because their mom told them to be here. There's some here because they think it will be a good career, but they don't know yet. There are some here who are exploring. There are some here who just have to be somewhere. And then even within those, there's different motivations. There's some here who have a scholarship and need a good mark to maintain it. There's some here that are going to check out halfway during the semester because of mental health issues, and we just know some of them do. We don't know which ones, but some of them will. There's some here who have no income and are living a hand-to-mouth existence outside of the school. There are some here who are disabled, and we can't see it because it's an invisible disability. And so all those learners go into this big pot, and we stir it around and we try to figure out not only their learning goals, but from their learning styles, how we can then design something for them. And for games, it's the same way. You'll have an easier time with games in a way, I think, because you kind of do the if you like X, you'll like Y scenario, and you kind of tailor your games to those types of players, and then you test your games with those types of players. And while this is a little bit of confirmation bias, it's also in some ways good design because you are saying you are my target audience. Do you like this game? If so, great, we've just hit the nail on the head. The next step of analysis in instructional design talks about broad goals. And we do that as well in game design, where we're saying, hey, what is the main thrust of this game? What is the interesting hook? What do we hope players get out of it? In fact, my metric, um, I use really weird broad metrics because I teach behavioral psychology a lot. And one of the things I look for is how do people behave when they play the game? What are they saying after the game? What are they saying between turns, between the games? What are they saying after the game is just finished and before the game starts? I look for that kind of behavioral stuff, and those become my metrics as opposed to, what did people score?
Yeah.
That's not as important to me, and I think that feedback really works as well in terms for instructional design. There are going to be some people who score amazing in your classes, and they just always kind of do. But that's not really a good test of your instructional design, is it? Because those people are the top end of the scale and they are going to score well in any class that they're in, whether they like it or not. And like I said, we do teach to the middle often and we do want to capture that. But we want to take that really, my goal for anything is to take that the median of the bell curve and raise it just a little bit so that everybody is kind of one step better than they were last time. Not a whole standard deviation, that's a lot of marks, but a little bit better than they were the last time they took a class.
Improvement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that constant improvement thing is a good idea. Then we go on to the D part of it, I guess.
Yep.
Design, which is the actual making of the thing. And this is usually the longest part, um, in but it's in the head, right? So a lot of
Yeah.
this is done in my head or on tables or paper or on a computer and not really shown to anybody. And that's the problem. You want to show things to people as soon as you can. With learning plans and instructional design stuff, I tend to be able to show that to other experts in the curriculum field that I'm studying or teaching and say, hey, what do you think of that? Do you think students would get something out of this? And so the specific skills and knowledge that they're wishing that we want them to obtain, um, the actual literal learning outcome that we're writing up. We call them, well, there's different things. So there's VLOs, which are vocational learning outcomes, and there's ESS, which are essential skills for that particular performance area. And we identify those and we write them down and then we link them to assessment methods. And how we will assess can be anything, could be, a portfolio, could
Yeah.
be a single assessment, could be a exit test, could be a cumulative test, whatever it is. We design and then we say, okay, how are we going to know that we did our job? And that comes through assessing learning. In the game world, how will we assess whether or not we design something well? I guess that's going to be what our BGG rating is. In some
Yeah.
ways, it is. But
There's a whole lot
before,
of people that are twitching about the BGG rating.
yeah, and it's a decent metric, but again, you have to analyze the
Yeah.
players. Who is going to actually spend the time to rate a game? Not everybody. Like not 100% of gamers. Definitely, it's a smaller subset than you'd think. So I don't know, Norm. Do you think I'm a big game nerd?
I would say just looking over your shoulder and seeing boxes of stacked games with shrink wrap on them still. Yes, I could
Yes.
probably confirm that.
Do you think that I rate every game that I've played?
Not a chance because I maybe 15%
Yeah,
because
I
I'd
just
rather
don't have
play.
time. Yeah, I just don't have time, and it's a little bit of a sticky subject as being a designer and rating other people's games. So on that note, I don't do it. And even when I did do it, I didn't really like to do it. I thought, oh, you know what? I'm supplying data to the data gods. I'm sacrificing information for the betterment of humankind. And in the end, does it do that? I don't know. I think the hotness is this weird thing, and the rating system is a weird thing where only the highest things continually show up and get rated. And so you see this paucity of data at one end, and you see this overabundance of data at another end that really skews things. And so, if you want to get into statistical analysis, they're doing a Bayesian statistics analysis method, but there's some faults with that that we don't need to go into on this show.
No, no.
But if you ever want to have a talk about that, it'd be
Well,
interesting.
when you're talking about assessing the learning part, would that be necessarily the playtesting?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And so I think in the design of the ADDIE process, it's a little bit not backwards, but we have to do a little more testing, I guess, in game design, because it's a packaged product that until the advent of the internet really didn't have the opportunity for a do-over.
yeah.
Whereas if you're like me, Norm, every semester you're tinkering with the
Oh,
same courses that you've tinkered with for the last 10 years,
yeah,
even though you know how to teach it like the back of your hand. You're like, it's just not good enough. I'm not getting those two students. I'm not hitting
yeah,
that everybody. How can I hit everybody? As you keep trying to tinker, and usually it makes the thing better, which is great. Or you come up with, you went to a seminar and you went to a seminar or a PD event that was about using clickers or something, and you
yeah,
say, "Oh man, that would make my classroom so engaging. Let's do that." And so you add and change. We don't have necessarily that luxury in game design, so I think we have to spend more time on evaluation. So the stuff you're talking about is that evaluation process, but I would stick that earlier on in the design process. I think it's essential, excuse me, to design. When I said that game design is it's emergent and iterative, that's that iterative part that I'm talking about, and the
yeah.
emergence as well, because it never is exactly like what I think it is in my head. I
Well,
have all
and
these great ideas in my
yeah,
head, but it's like I think Patton said, no plan survives contact with the enemy.
exactly.
It's the
Because
same thing,
for my lessons where I think about a unit or a lesson and I think, oh, this is gold, and then I'll teach it and it'll be a good lesson. But then when I ask for feedback, I will get feedback related to perspectives that I had not even considered.
right? Because we're egocentric,
Yeah,
right? We still,
and
even
I'm
as
I'm
mature as we
appreciative
are,
of it
yeah,
too.
of course, we have to be open to that, and that's probably the biggest skill you can have as a game designer is the ability to take feedback without taking it personally, right? Because it's not about you, and it's not about you even as a teacher. It's actually just about that class or that course, and
Or
it's like,
the
oh,
students, yeah,
and it really isn't about you at all. It's about the students.
yeah,
Um, I came to this realization once. I said, you know what? My job actually isn't done until a student understands the thing I'm supposed to be teaching them. And if they aren't, that's kind of on me and
yeah,
kind of on the lesson as well. And so I used to get angry when I was a young teacher, I used to get kind of angry when students wouldn't understand stuff because it'd be like, "Oh, I spent so much time thinking about how to make this so accessible to everybody that can't possibly be wrong, right?"
Yeah.
And it's interesting, even just to reflect on this and think about that. By the way, teaching is a hugely reflective process. So is game design. If you aren't reflecting as a designer or a teacher, y'all are doing something wrong. So get
Or you're in the
started.
wrong profession.
Yeah, you need to reflect and be humble and understand that you can make mistakes, and those mistakes actually have a big effect.
Here's
Um,
a before you
yeah,
continue,
yeah,
here's a question that I have. As a teacher, my one of my goals, I mean, once I've done my work and I've created this lesson and I've created the content, I start to think that my job as a teacher is now not to get in the way of the learning.
yeah. A great
Because
way to do it.
I've done my job, I've done my due diligence to the instructional design that now I'm not teaching, I'm facilitating, and I have to allow the students the time to absorb and process and synthesize the information and not, not be beside them going, "Okay, come on, you should have this by now. Let's move on to the next thing."
Yeah. That looks like the develop part of the ADDIE model where you have facilitation logistics, right? So your lesson plan is technically separate than your strategies of how you're going to implement that plan and how you will facilitate students learning as the process describes. Um, in game design, we don't really have that so much. We have a rule book. There is actually a whole lot of stuff that you can do to do that, though. How do you
Mhm.
facilitate a player learning the rules and playing the game better? Good UX will do that.
Yeah.
So, a combination of graphic design, text, rules, how you lay out the board and the rules and the cards can all facilitate a person's experience. Actually, if you want to hear a bit about that in a couple weeks, I think we're going to have the Finches, Kate Finch, and maybe Joel join us on Meeple Syrup Show, which is a show that I talk about game design on. And they're going to join us, and they are two UX designers who are also game designers from Brisbane, Australia. So that'll be really interesting. Seeing design through the eyes of a UX professional, user experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. The logistics stage in um, the instructional design process. So before that, we jump back. Well, let's jump back to design process
For
here. It
sure,
says
for sure.
identify the outcomes and how will you know. I just want to stick in a little note here for all the teaching professionals listening: is test early and test often. Your students, test them, like assess, assess, assess.
Yeah.
In college, it's different, right? Because we have students that expect we're going to have a midterm that's worth 40%, a final project that's worth 10%, and a cumulative exam that's worth 50%. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're going to have 1% a day little assignments to do, and I'm testing you every second week, and those tests are worth 9% each, and you're going to have a very big group project that's 20% of your mark or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Test early, test often, and test in various ways. So not everything is going to be a multiple choice test because they suck. Sometimes that's the only way you can get
Yeah.
things done. I test, evaluate, assess learning. I think that's a better way.
Yeah.
It's not just testing; it's assessing learning. So how can you assess learning? Give people marks when they show you that they've done some learning. Like I do exit for a 3-hour class. I'll just do an exit
Exit
essay
slip.
at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end, it's your little ticket. Now you can leave. Did you learn something from this class? Write something down. And then I use those not only just to give them some marks on a daily basis, but then to evaluate their learning
Yeah.
and go back to step 5 and then say, okay, next week, I see that everybody got this section, not quite the way I'd like you to. So we're going to revisit that for the first 5 minutes of class. So the bridging in will be a review,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's
and
okay.
you can determine where the learning kind of went into the weeds
Mhm.
and correct it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we can do that with game design as well. So test early, test often with game design. The first test should be getting the game out of your head onto the table as fast as you can, and test it with yourself. Test it with another friend who's a good gamer, whose feedback you value, and go back to the drawing board and do it again. And why I say game design is emergent is because you'll find things when playing that you never thought would be issues, that you never thought would be the most fun part of it, that you never thought would be clouded by rules and obfuscated by behavior. And then you'll figure out, what do I need to tease out? What do I need to make shine? And you can't do that if you don't put it on the table, just like you
Yeah.
can't find out what people are doing wrong in their learning process without making them show you some work,
Well, and
right?
from like you said, your background's in a little bit in behavioral psychology, and you can't observe the thinking process.
No, it's a covert behavior. We can't
Yeah.
do that. So lots of students, and I think we trick them. If we want to talk about behavioral incentivization, we tell them in math specifically. We say, "Hey, show me the work, so I can give you part marks." And that's just part of it, really. I'm hoping all the teachers out there know that that's not why we get them to show the work.
Yeah.
We get them to show the work so we know where to help them if they go wrong,
Well, it's
right?
our only ability to observe the learning is to
It really
yeah,
is. It
like
really, really
stream
is.
of consciousness answer.
Yeah. And so I do that all the time in instructional design. I design my courses so that, because I'm doing whole like 15-week blocks of courses at a time,
Yeah.
I look at the end, I go, okay, what do I want them to learn? And then I go backwards. How do I get them to learn all those things by using several different assessment methods across here? And if they're doing a big major project, I need to do a check and balance maybe 2 weeks before the final thing is due, which means I need to start 4 weeks before that. So I have them do a rough draft. I mark it at 2 weeks, give them feedback. Then they have a week or two to reiterate, do their own re-implementation and redevelopment of the thing, because they should be following this type of process as well.
Yeah.
They should be following an iterative process as well. And so for students to do that, we have to do that as well as teachers. We have to allow them that process. That it's a do-overs are okay. Do-overs are fine. And if you think about games, games are literally loops. They are do-over loops. Did I get 12 points last time? No, I only got 8. I
I
think I
was
can get more the next time.
I was waiting for it to come to this because it's that's how I learn to become a better player at certain games is assess. If I just finished this, now where were my failures? Where were my misunderstandings? Now let's go back and redo this exam, I guess.
Mhm. And it's really interesting, in rule design for games, you'll often find that people don't put the outcome at the beginning, they put it at the end. But the funny thing about designing that things that way, and the funny thing about designing courses that way, is that if people don't know what their learning outcome is or what the game eventual outcome should be, they actually don't know what to pay attention to in
Exactly.
the class or in the game. And so good instructional design and good game design both have the quality that, hey, put that up front. Tell the students, tell the players, what are you expected to do and learn in this system, because they're just systems. Both of them are just systems. And then how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Right? So that's first day syllabus reading for us. It's like, here are the objectives, and then here is how. But then each day we go through that. Here's today's learning outcomes. By the end of the day, these are the things that I hope you will learn. Here's how we're going to teach you, and here's how we're going to assess that learning just in today, right?
Yeah.
So good instructional design does follow the same loop as good game design, or vice versa. Um, and that loop that we're talking about really is just a behavioral loop. It's input the behavior, output the thing that you want. And I mean, if we're going to talk about behavior incentivization, this is where it all comes to the crux. Students work for marks, and they hopefully get their learning objectives met while getting marks,
Yeah.
right? Games are people work for victory points, and I hope they have fun or are engaged while they're gaining those victory points. They're just going on a loop cycle. If you really want to boil things down, that is what's happening both in a classroom and at the game table. You are literally in a behavioral loop with an output input method. It's operant conditioning all the way through in a lot of ways, right?
Put the
Um,
mouse in the maze.
yeah. Let's see what else is there. So instructional strategies. I just taught a class on Vygotsky yesterday, so I mean, this kind of fits well into that, like zone of proximal
Yeah,
development and scaffolding and all that kind of stuff. That's what we're talking about in that third stage of development a little bit. And we need to develop that for our game players as well. So one thing we're doing in this one game that I'm working on right now that I can't tell you the name of, because then some major motion picture studio would come and send an assassin after me or something.
or here's
But
a cease and desist letter before we're
yeah,
done the podcast.
well, it won't be a cease and desist because they want the game done. It's more, hey, you can't talk about that.
Yeah,
But in the game, anyways, we teach the players how to play the game in the first little bit of the game, if you get my drift. Right?
absolutely. Yeah,
We are
absolutely.
creating a methodology of play through almost a tutorial. In not in the rules, it's actually as you're playing, these things are happening that will teach you, oh, that's exactly what you want to do. And they teach you that through behavioral operant conditioning. Like you get a
Hmm.
reward, you did something right, you get the reward. Now move on.
Yeah,
You now know how to do that. And the next thing you did this thing right, you get this little reward. Great.
yeah,
Now you know how to do that. And then that facilitation means I can leave you to play. I don't have to hold your hand this whole way through. And really, when you talked about how you view teaching and that you're creating an environment for learning, that you facilitate the first couple steps, and then after that, it's up to the student to do some work to learn the rest of it. That's exactly what a classroom should be,
yeah,
and that's exactly what a game should be. They don't want to be. It doesn't need to be on rails, and it doesn't need to be handheld through the whole thing. And people should be allowed to make choices that they want to make, allowed to fail
yeah.
at those choices, to experiment within this system to see what works, what doesn't, what gets them points, what doesn't. And it's only through good facilitation at the beginning that we can let people do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always wanted my teaching methodology to be, as I said before, like a guide on the side, and
As
just
opposed to the sage on the stage, right?
yeah, and allow them. I mean, watch them, go through whatever thinking process, and there's most of the time I can already predict that they're going to come to a dead end, but I'm thinking they need to experience that in order to back up and go, okay, where did we take a left when we should have made a right? And
Yes.
I will sit back and wait and be as patient as I can. And I think that's a lot of the instructional design is you can't you can't control the way people interpret your your lesson plans, so you have to be patient to see how each learning style is going to input or allow that lesson to use the term MIDI, right? Like a
Yeah.
MIDI cable. How is it going to connect? Are all the pins going to connect? Are half the pins going to connect? So,
Hmm.
and that's to me, that's where I get antsy because I'm thinking, I want you to get there so I can step in, but then I have
Oh,
to allow you to get there before I step in, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same with a game design where you're testing a game. You just want to be there. But the best test of a game is literally that blind play test, where you get the players to play just from the rules that they've read and all the stuff they can interpret on the board game. And this is where UX and graphic design comes into play. Your game should teach itself.
Yes.
You aren't in the box, right? And similarly, your course should be able to have some parts where the students can go do their own learning. Because, as Vygotsky would say, people don't learn well when they're given everything and left to their own devices, and people don't learn well when they're taught everything and are, hovered over. So it's that kind of fine line between having the person who's gone before pull a little, and then the class follow a little and explore that proximal difference, that space that is the proximal development zone by themselves with your assistance. And you come in and you kind of say, "Oh no, hey,
Yeah.
where do you think you went wrong there?" When you see something going wrong, as opposed to saying, "This is what you must do, and this is what you must do, and this is what you must do." A funny story from today's class, even just on the idea of how your rules and stuff get interpreted incorrectly sometime is I asked my students today to write me a thesis statement using just basically a Mad Lib style thesis development statement of opinion because ABC. And
Hmm.
then I said after that, and I also want you to submit through your ePortfolio, submit 3 sources in APA format that you might be using for this paper that you're writing. It's just a 500 word paper, persuasive or exposition on a particular area of study. And there's a couple students who go, "Well, what? How can I cite in my thesis statement?" Because they just see I need sources, and they think they had to do parenthetic citation within the thesis statement. I said, no, 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 no. Where are we going wrong here?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's another big lesson I learned. Maybe a couple years after I started teaching, was it's not all about me. A lot of this is actually about the students, right? It's all about the students. Don't let me fool you
Yeah.
there. It's all about the students, and if you didn't correctly translate information, you done something wrong. But
Yeah.
that's okay because you can change that. Don't say, "Well, don't you understand?" Just say, "Okay, here's how. This is what's supposed to happen. Does that help you? Do you understand now? Is that okay?" Right? Take the time to actually listen to your students and not get mad when they have questions. Like that's your job, dude. Like your job is to answer these questions, right?
But pride gets in the way sometimes.
It totally does. And so one of the life mantras that I've adopted since starting teaching, because I wasn't a teacher always, I was a clinical therapist before, is it's assume no malice. That my students are there for a reason. They want to be there. They might be having a bad day, but it's not about me.
Yeah.
And though I pour sweat and blood and tears into my lessons, I literally do, um, it's still not about me. It's still about them.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the game design stuff, right? You know, your ego, you got to check it at the door when you're designing a game and be really open to feedback because who knows, they might have just solved the problem. But if you go, no, my design's faultless and perfect and all
Oh
this stuff,
yeah.
you're an idiot. You don't have you ever designed a game? Let me tell you about all the games I've designed. That's why my game is awesome. You will find yourself without people wanting to play your games because they're like, I'm not going to play for that d bag anymore.
Yeah.
And B, you're going to find yourself in a place where you're not able to get what you really need, which is feedback. To develop a good game, you need feedback. A good game cannot be developed in a vacuum. I think you can make a game, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be that good. Or the
Here's
chances of it being good are very poor.
to to uh to push this on a tangent maybe.
Yeah.
Um it just prompted in my head when I had an intern. She asked me what's the most important thing involved or connected to teaching, and I just stopped and I put down all this stuff. I said the most important thing about teaching has nothing to do with teaching. It is the relationship.
Oh yeah,
That's the more,
100%.
and so with that perspective, how put those glasses on the game designer is that relationship with the player just as important as the relationship established with the teacher and a student?
I don't think so necessarily because it's ephemeral,
Yeah,
and you're also 99.99999% not at the same table in the same room as people who are playing your games, right? My games are played across the world.
yeah.
I'm not in that box with them. I'd love to be,
But
but I
like
can't,
like
right?
a musician,
But definitely playtesting, and
yeah.
definitely in playtesting, it is about relationships.
Okay.
And game design as a industry is about relationships. People talk about networking, and I say no, no, no. Build a relationship
Yeah.
because you will get 10 times further with somebody who likes you versus the person who you just gave your business card to.
And
Right?
people can sense that. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
honesty and integrity and transparency go a long way in not only teaching but in game design. So in teaching, one of the things that I do every first class of every class that I've ever taught is I tell them about how I almost failed out of university, because I don't want them to be afraid of failure. I want them to see that hey, even after you fail, you can be pretty successful. And I show them, pictures of my family. I show them game design. I show them stuff I do musically. I show them all this kind of stuff. And it's not to say, hey, you've got a really cool teacher who's awesome. It's to say, look, I literally almost failed out of first year. Like my average was so low that the university said, "You, sir, can no longer live in residence. You are kicked out of residence, and you're about this close to being kicked out of the entire school." So it was a warning sign. You know, shot across the bow. Get your act
Yep.
together. Um, and I think that's okay. It's okay to fail. And really, if you think about learning and game design and play, if you think about all those things together, it is all about failing to find the best parts of it. You fail, but in failing, you're like, okay, that's not a good part. That's the thing I don't want to do
You-
anymore. Let's
You've
find the
just
good part.
described most of my games because I'll come in last place sometimes, but I will have the best time, the best experience, and that whole idea of 2 days later, I'm thinking about that game and I'm
Mhm.
processing and yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? I often tell students that you learn more through your failures than you do through your successes. And I'm a competitive martial artist, and for a very long time, I never lost. I just couldn't lose. No matter what I did, I wouldn't lose, and so it became very difficult for me to analyze my own progress. And it was only higher belts who could actually tell me what was wrong, but I had to go and be willing to ask them that. So tell me something. What could I improve?
Hmm.
You have to want to do that though. A lot of times students aren't in that mode yet just because they're just happy to scrape by. Because it's not just, one thing. They have 9 classes or something like that, right? So anyway, let's look at this thing again. So implement, try out the lesson plan with units or students. Yeah, so implement and evaluate, that is really, and develop. That's really that cycle that I talk about when I talk about iteration. It
Yeah.
is design, test, redesign, and that's it. That's it.
And then back to the
And
beginning
ad
and put it
nauseum,
through the
ad
rinse. Yeah.
nauseum, yeah. And in between there, there's, add. You're gonna you're gonna get feedback from people. So that's that little critical crux. I'll be talking about it on an online seminar. I think I'm talking about that on Saturday, um, with the Board Game Design Lab. So Gabe Barrett about
Hmm.
play testing itself. So that little itty bitty part of that iterative process, but it is the key critical part. And that's like the key critical part of instructional design, which is teach the actual damn class to
Yeah.
people, and then facilitate and be open to their feedback, which so many teachers aren't. And so many students don't think they can give feedback, which is bullcocky,
Yeah.
because most
They're
teachers
thinking about it, that's for
They
sure.
they want that feedback. They just
Yeah.
have to be open to it and be willing to get that. And so, I often put little things at the end of my slide presentation or whatever, like, if you have any questions or concerns about today's class, email me at this. They know, they have my email, they have, my office hours, they have all this stuff. And it's not super common that I get feedback. Um, about specific classes, but sometimes I do, and that's great.
Yeah.
Um, it's an equal amount of people who give me, "Oh my god, that was amazing," and "That really stunk. I didn't learn a thing. What was I supposed to learn today?" Um, and it's not always in the same lesson. That's a good thing, because if
Yeah.
it's in the same lesson, then I'd be like, I don't know what I can do for you. But usually, it's that kind of thing where, oh, I also was having trouble with that. I also didn't know how I was going to teach you that thing, and apparently, I didn't do very well. Or it might be I actually am super transparent with students. I'll say like, this is the first time I'm trying this particular way of teaching you. So you let me know at the end. Did you learn the thing that I'm listing here as the outcome, right?
Yeah.
I hold myself very much beholden to the learning outcomes and things like that in terms of my responsibility as the teacher to get that through to the students. Did you learn that? Did I do my part? And a lot of times that will get more feedback than just the general,
Yeah.
hey,
Or be
give me
specific and
feedback.
go, what learning style did I not spend enough time with?
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of the times, I mean, I teach French immersion students, and they are typically, the AP advanced students.
Hmm.
And I'm, like you said, when we're doing a project, I will tell them at any stage, if you see a better idea or a better way to get this outcome, then tell me,
Mhm.
because I can't think of everything.
Yep,
And
these are just the ways I know.
yeah,
And I even do that on tests. Like I'll say, "Hey, we're not." I don't take up tests in classrooms because that just leaves me open to all sorts of debate, which is something I'm not inviting, particularly on a test front. Not from a whole class, not 50 against one, right?
yeah.
It's just that's not a fair room to discuss things in. But I say, if you have a question about your test results, set up an appointment. It has to mean something to you. It can't be just I'm fighting for marks. It's like I really don't believe that this was fairly done, assessed.
Yeah.
And then we'll have a talk. And if I agree, I'll change marks for everybody in the class based on your feedback. So you should do this.
And the validity of that feedback too.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, somebody comes up and they say, "Hey, I didn't really get this question." And then I'll just because I can pull out all the stats and I say, "Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? 50% of the class really did poorly on this thing. Maybe I'll just wipe that question out." I take
Or
the whole question out and
or
I
go back
reword it
and
for the next
review
year.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah, for
review.
sure. I'd
Yeah.
review it in the class as well. But I won't do that for the whole test because it's just and with the whole class there at once.
And you
I'll
have
do
a
it for
curriculum to get through.
specific things. Yes, which is very different than game design. Game design,
Yeah.
we don't have a curriculum to get through, but we're
But you
also
have
not there to
publishers.
yeah. Yeah, we do have, time frames. You know, we
Yeah.
do have limitations to what we can do, but we have to make room for that feedback process in game design. Like, it's one of the things that you'll notice over the last couple of years. So when Kickstarter first started, I want to say, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when Kickstarter first started, and maybe into even the last couple of years, you will see that there are games that have come out which look great but are horrific because they haven't done their due diligence in the design process. So
Exactly.
in that design, develop, implement, evaluate, they didn't do it enough. And so you get these half-baked products coming out that didn't have enough development time.
Yeah.
And now you'll see that there's a lot more publishers searching for third-party developers because while they might not have the wherewithal to do it themselves, or they're like a single designer, they're looking for people outside to give them their opinions to get that information. And the other thing about that that's important is that you have to recognize that if you're playtesting and you playtest with the same group all the time, that is a very small pool of data, right? And
Yes.
that you need to broaden that just a little bit, get outside that a little bit, have differentiated players,
Yeah.
right? Play styles, different understandings, different play groups, because all those dynamics matter, right?
That's funny because even just today I had some students working on a project, and they asked me, well, how many examples, or how many related events should I put to this? And I said, okay, your phone, your GPS, what's the minimum amount of satellites for that thing to know where you are? 3. And I'm like, okay, then let's use that metaphor. For me to understand that you know where you are and what you're talking about, how many examples do I need? And they, oh, okay, 3. And I said, now, if you want to be even more detailed and even more extravagant in describing this, and this GPS location, the more satellites you have or the more resources you have, the better I will be able to interpret your understanding of the. And all of a sudden, that light bulb just went off, and they basically they just looked at me and went, "Okay, stop talking now. I
Yeah.
get it."
I need to work. I need to find those
Yeah,
5 sources for you now, right?
yeah,
Exactly, and, I think, we have to go through all those steps to make a good instruction, set. So let's take a look at these. Implement, try out, or plan your unit with the students. Yep, that's great. And then evaluate. Were you successful? Did your students learn? Did they have fun doing it? Should you change for the next time? Perfect. That is exactly what we do in game design as well. Like, how do you measure success? Well, were they engaged? Did they learn? Did they do the behaviors that you wanted them to do? And so, again, being a behavioral science kind of person, I look at the behaviors. Did they do? And behaviors are lots of things. They're not just those subtle body language cues, but I'm also talking about in-game behaviors. Like, did they buy the cards that we thought were the most powerful cards? Did they? Uh, do the actions that we thought people would do and gain the most points. How did they win? What did they do? And you have to track all those behaviors. And then what did we learn by watching them? Oh, well, okay, nobody ever did this action. Okay, then why does it exist? Let's
Yeah.
cut that out, right? Or nobody learned this. Okay, well, is it important? If not, cut it out. If it is important, okay, we might need to give some more time to it. What should you change for the next time? The nice thing about game design is that they're because it's hopefully fun, that people will wanna play it again, and it's like, 45 minutes to 90 minutes of their life usually, it's not this big deal. The bad thing about instructional design is typically you're going to wait for a whole semester before you can implement the change for that specific class. But what you can do, and what happens often, is you learn from class one, and you have enough time to scramble to put that kind of new methodology into place for class 3, if not
Yeah.
class 2, right? Depends on your rotation cycle. Like, if it's the next day, you might not get there, but the next week, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So, time doesn't wait for anybody, but you can get that all together. So, yes, after going through the 5 steps of analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate, I hereby state that this would be an okay process to follow as a game designer. Um, and why it makes sense is because learning is a game. Learning should be a game. If you think
Structured
about,
play.
yeah, it's structured play. If you think about what, and that's obviously at the um, pinnacle. I can't say I'm actually ever there a lot, to be honest. There's not a lot of structured playtime that happens in the college classroom because the stakes for some reason seem higher. Um, and so, a lot of times if we did that, um, the college would look at that and go, "What are you doing?" Sometimes the students might not even value it because it seems like it's almost stealth learning, right?
Yeah.
But I still try to put playfulness into the classes and into the learning styles. Um, and I allow people to do wide and varied things in their presentations. And some of them involve games, and some of them involve, fun things, theatrics, and that's a good thing. That those are the memorable things, right?
Mhm.
Um, what else is there in this? Yeah, I think this is a really good process for both. Oh, but what I was saying about learning is really just and games are really just these loops of behavior that we do, and it's the same idea that we're trying to do a behavior and get a reward, do a behavior, get a reward, do a behavior, get a reward. And you can see where my psychological bent is as well,
Well,
in operant conditioning and whatnot.
yeah.
But that's how we learn, uh, and that's actually how we play as well. Play isn't isn't functionless, and it would be a very big misguided notion to think that play isn't guided, or play doesn't have a
Or
guide.
purposeless.
Yeah, or yeah, that play has a purpose. It always has a purpose. Whether you think it does or not,
Yeah.
that's your fault, really. But play always has a purpose, and we can use that. We can tap into the innate desire for people to play when we make courses. And then that should be actually the express goal when you're making a game, of course. But this process that we've looked at today, um, the ADDIE process, I think it could be design of games as well. So yeah, I don't think it's wrong. I think the Venn diagram is quite an overlap, and the more you reflect on it, the more you'll hopefully see that. Oh yeah, it's very similar, very similar.
Well, I think we've got this process identified, and as you said, we've put the stamp of approval on it. I'm very excited to get to the next phase because
Sure.
it's always something I wanted to do because I'm such a huge fan. When I was younger, inside the actor studio and the Pivot questionnaire.
Hmm.
So I've modified it to work with our topic. And I'm just going to give them to you, and we'll do short answers. And let's see how surprised you can be by some stream of consciousness responses here. So, question number one: what is your favorite game mechanism?
Oh, that's a good one. My favorite game mechanism. would probably be oh,
Don't think too much.
well, I'm gonna say that it's probably not necessarily a mechanism, but it's part of a mechanism.
Or
So,
system.
yeah, I like games where it's actually smaller than that. I like games where you have a pivot.
Okay.
Um, oh, this is amazing. Okay, so you're a fellow Canadian, so I you will understand when I say I like games where there's a TSN turning point,
Absolutely. I
right?
totally understand that one.
So I
Like the
design
Rough Riders having one too many players on the field.
right. I live for those moments in games where you have to make that critical decision that will affect the rest of the game. As now, I'm going to turn my strategy towards this.
High stakes, high reward.
Yeah. So I like that. I like
All
that kind
right.
of stuff.
Number two, what is your least favorite game mechanism?
Oh, anything where people aren't playing. So if you make a game where a person's options on a turn are to pass or do nothing, like passing is basically doing nothing. That's not an option. Don't make that an option. Or waiting or anything like that. Um, not making decisions. That any game that has these things where you're really not making decisions,
I
let's follow that
agree
out.
wholeheartedly. My ADD brain goes off the rails.
Yeah, let's get rid of that kind of stuff. Now, um, that doesn't mean that there aren't good games that have things like player elimination or games where you have to sit and think. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying, is it useful time off? And just passing because you have no better options. Well, that's just bad game design. The game designer should give you better options,
All right.
right?
Number three, what engages you as a designer?
Uh, More and more, it's story. Story engages me as a designer. I want to tell good stories through the games. I don't necessarily want the players to have to tell good stories, but I do like that as well as a theatrical person myself. I enjoy it when people are telling stories, but I want the games to be an arc, have a narrative arc to them, where you're not just rinse, wash, and repeat the same thing over and over.
Okay. Number four, what turns you off about game design or the gaming hobby?
Not the game design part because that is my savior. That's my psychological refuge is getting ideas out of my head. Um, but what turns me off about the hobby is, as of late, just bringing some things to light in terms of sexual harassment and that kind of stuff. That there's still a long way to go for our hobby to be inclusive.
Hmm.
And to those people who say, well, you're not being very inclusive of people with other ideas, well, if their ideas have anything to do with hatred of other people based on race, color, sexual orientation, gender,
Yeah.
uh, they can go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's fine. I can be intolerant of them. I'm okay with that.
Okay. I quite agree. All right. So number five, now number five is the question that I don't think I have to change because in the Pivo questionnaire is what is your favorite curse word? So I'm going to change that to what is your favorite take that mechanism because that provokes curse words.
Okay, good. Um, that's an interesting thing. So
Or are you appreciative of the take
oh,
that mechanism?
I like a good take that game. I like a good game where you can get it up in somebody's grill. I actually like we Jesse and I particularly and one other guy that I co-design with, we actually pretty much specialize in two-player combat games. That's what we've ended up making a whole lot of. And so they're definitely confrontational in your face, doing damage to each other. Uh, but I'll have to say my favorite thing. So if you understand Magic, I am a blue player. My goal is to make you play the way I want you to play and dominate by disallowing you to do the things that you want to do and forcing you to do the things that I want to do. So my favorite take that mechanics would be control. I like controlling other people.
Do you for a second there? I just had flashbacks of passive aggressive behavior from my parents.
Well, no, I'm pretty damn aggressive when it's that.
All right, number six. I had so much fun kind of manipulating this one. What sound or noise related to board gaming do you like?
Oh man. Um, the sound that is my absolute favorite sound in board gaming is the clip on the packages in Sheriff of Nottingham.
I have not played that, so I'm not familiar.
Okay, so let me explain. In Sheriff of Nottingham, you have these little packages, and
Yeah.
they have these little cam clip style things. They're just little plastic clips that when you close the bag, game on. Like you,
Okay.
what the? Do you understand the premise behind
Absolutely.
Sheriff of?
I know
Right,
I've seen the game played,
right.
and
So
now
in
I know exactly what you're
Right.
talking
So in
about.
Sheriff of Nottingham, you don't start telling people anything about what's in the package or trying to pass them to the sheriff until the clip is closed. And the clip has this amazing auditory and tactile feel to it that when it clips and you press it down, your brain automatically switches into I'm going to lie my face off mode, or
I
I'm going
was
to tell the
just
truth with, but assume that I'm lying, right? That kind of thing.
You had mentioned that you had a background in drama, and right away I thought that's the sound of a clapperboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Action, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
action. Yeah.
absolutely.
And so that to me is an amazing sound. Another sound that I love is Liar's Dice because 30 dice in 6 dice cups being rolled simultaneously and slammed on the table is amazing because as soon as that sound stops, the lying starts,
All
right?
right. Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Apparently, I like lying a lot.
Well, you know,
I actually really do. I think, and we haven't really made a really good bluffing game. I don't think so. That's a
th-
goal.
there you go. Okay.
2019 goal, a bluffing game.
Number 7. What
Yes.
sound or noise related to board gaming do you dislike?
Oh, what's that? Whatever sound your phone is making. And I will be completely honest that I am a huge phone user while gaming. So I am guilty of that as well. So I will stop doing that if you stop doing that.
Okay. Number 8. What game would you like to play?
Like right now?
Absolutely.
Rock, paper, scissors. Ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. What'd you put? I can't see your hand. Oh, we both scissored. We'll have to do it again. Ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Ah, we both did paper. Okay, this is gonna go on forever. Ready?
Okay.
Rock. No one. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Scissors again? Scissors
Yep.
again. What are you doing? It's like we're in each other's head.
I
Okay,
think
let's.
I think we read the same paper.
I think we're gonna have to go on.
All right. Next, number 9. What game would you not like to play?
Oh, what game would I not like to play? I would not like to play the game where winning and losing can be determined in the first turn. And there are actually quite a few of those games.
I'm
That if
thinking
you,
Splotter games, right, right
eh,
there,
well, s-
or the way I
spl-
play them, at least.
well, yeah. So splatter games, if everybody at the table is equal in turn or relatively equal in terms of knowledge of the game and understanding of the system, that's not going to happen by design. But and that's a player side thing. But there are games that by design you can lose in the first turn and then just have to play the rest of it.
Exactly.
Or you can lose in the first turn by player elimination, or everybody can gang up on you. So those are the types of games I don't really enjoy playing. I also don't enjoy playing games that have lots of fiddly procedural bits. By that I mean upkeep.
Hmm.
Like, okay, before and at the end of the round, everybody does X, Y, Z, O, and A, B, C, O, and O, and 1, 2, 3.
And if
And
you miss one of those steps, the
now,
game's ruined.
yes, and now we can start playing.
Yeah.
Oh, on that note, I also don't like passive abilities. So remembering that, oh, crap, I have a sword, that allows me to roll an extra die, and I'm gonna do that right now. So let's roll back your last turn. Okay? No, not okay.
No
Yeah, so
mulligans.
I don't like passive abilities because they can be forgotten.
Yeah.
So I like anything that says, like if it's the same sword, the same exact sword can be redesigned to say, you gain, flip this card over to gain +1 die, right? And then at the end of the round, everybody just procedurally, I know I said I don't like procedure, but whatever. But if everybody's just flipping their used cards over back to the face up side, great, we're done,
Yeah.
right? So there's ways to do that kind of stuff.
All right. Number 10. The Pivo number 10 question is very heavy as far as the philosophical perspectives. That's the one. If heaven exists, what would you like? But I changed it too because I thought it's that whole glory moment. So, if money and resources were not a problem, what game would you like to design?
Oh. So, um, I'm a huge nerd, and what I do when I play games, when I was younger, I would be playing, say, Warhammer, but I'd also simultaneously be playing a game of the Horus Heresy or Battle for Armageddon at the same time, which represented all of the battles that we were having. So we would move on this kind of small, macro scale, grand strategy bored, like my army's moving here, my army's moving here. Oh, we just fought each other. Oh, let's go play that on the big table over there with our actual miniatures. Right, that's the kind of game that I would love to see, and that has a narrative arc, that has progression, so your characters gain and lose skills based on the battle outcomes, and then those individual miniatures change a little bit. That's what I'd love to see.
That's great. You know what? I want you
A
to
lot.
make that game.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, this is a fine way to wrap it up because you've pretty much. I have so much to go research now and go investigate that I think I created more homework for myself. But
That's
that's
okay.
okay. I like good homework.
Yeah.
Well, that being said, give us a plug. You had mentioned before other podcasts that you
Oh yeah, sure.
participate in, and
So I'm the host or co-host of Meeple Syrup. It is a show about discussing design with designers. Usually it's other designers. As of late, we've had all sorts of people on there. We've had convention runners. We've had people who focus on very specific parts of design. But it's myself, Jesse Wright, who is a PhD postdoc at Stanford in the philosophy of neuroscience, very strange
ooh,
field, and then Erica Hayes Biaras, who is a elementary school teacher in Toronto, who is also a game designer. And so you should have her on sometime if you want to talk
absolutely.
and games in the classroom. And so we three meet every Wednesday at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it's a Facebook Live show. So if you want to follow us on Facebook at Meeple Syrup Show, you'll get a message on your Facebook that says, "Hey, we're going live." And that is our show on Wednesday. And we do other stuff on that channel every so often live during the week. And we have on that Facebook page, we have like design questions that we ask people and pro tips that we give people. So it's a good little community of about 750 people. It's not a huge thing, but it's a nice little community where you can feel safe to ask your questions and get them answered by some people who know a thing or two about game design, and that's good. Other things, I guess, look out for the upcoming games on Kickstarter, which will be the reprint of Belfort, so the 10th anniversary edition of Belfort, which all with all sorts of interesting new stuff in there actually. And then the Kickstarter at the end of October for Mutants, which is a building arena combat game that I did with Jesse Wright.
Okay.
So yeah, there you go.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I was so enthralled during the moments where you were going through the design process that anybody who knew me would have probably been impressed because I would have wanted to jump into the conversation. It was just sit back and listen, just soak it up. So yes, once again, thank you very much.
Anytime.
I am so happy that we had this opportunity, and I hope that the listeners out there can take whatever they can from this conversation. Like you said, as teachers, we don't know how you learn or what you learn, but just that you learned something.
hmm And again, if you want to reach out to me personally, my Twitter is at Sen Foong Lim, SenFoonglim, and I am more than happy to talk shop, whether it's game design, instructional design, psychology, therapy, whatever. We can do it all. We can talk all about that kind of stuff. So please
Excellent.
contact me.
Well, thank you, everybody. And that was episode 2. We'll catch you later.